Snow had a way of softening even the hardest things, but that morning it sharpened them instead. It fell in thin, patient lines, quiet as held breath, settling on the roof of the sheriff's office and the empty hitching posts along Main Street. At the edge of the steps lay a police dog, his dark fur powdered white, his body folded neatly, as if he were waiting for permission to move. One heavy boot came down on his paw, not hard enough to break bone, just enough to remind him of his place. The dog did not snarl. He did not cry out. He only lifted his eyes, steady and unreadable, as if he were listening to something far beyond the reach of human voices. People noticed, of course. In small towns, nothing happens unseen. But noticing and caring are different acts, and winter teaches people to conserve warmth in strange ways. A few men laughed, the sound brittle in the cold. Someone muttered that the dog was useless now, that his handler was gone, and everything attached to that name might as well fade with the season. The boot lifted. The moment passed. Snow continued to fall, erasing evidence the way it always does. The dog's name was Coda, though most of the town had stopped using it. Names are easier to forget than faces, and easier still when they belong to something that cannot speak up for itself. Coda had once walked these streets with purpose, head high, shoulder brushing against a man's leg in perfect, practiced alignment. Back then, doors opened faster. Conversations lowered their tone. Children pointed with awe instead of fear. Now he lay alone, breath fogging the air, eyes tracking the door that refused to open for him. Elias Crow had been the last man to walk through that door with Coda at his side. Elias was not the kind of man people remembered vividly. He did not take up space with stories or laughter. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words arrived already weighed and measured. He had come to the town years ago as a lawman, stayed long enough to become familiar, and left just quickly enough to become a rumor. They said he had been reassigned. They said he had been killed. They said many things, because silence makes people uneasy, and unease demands explanation. What the town agreed upon was this: Elias was not coming back, and so the dog, faithful to a fault, became an inconvenience, a reminder of something unfinished. Coda waited anyway. He waited through mornings, when frost stitched the windows shut, and evenings, when the lamps flickered like tired stars. He waited through the way people stepped around him instead of over him, careful not to be unkind enough to feel guilty, but never kind enough to matter. His body knew the rhythm of patrols that no longer happened, his ears still tuned for a voice that had not called his name in months. Waiting was not hope, not exactly. It was duty, ingrained deeper than hunger or cold. Clara Whitlock noticed him because she noticed things others missed. Perhaps it was the habit of teaching children, of watching for the quiet ones who needed help but never asked. Or perhaps it was grief, still living close to her own skin, making her sensitive to it in others. She had lost her husband 2 winters ago. Lost him not to drama or violence, but to a sickness that came softly and stayed. Since then, she moved through the world carefully, as if sudden gestures might break something fragile inside her. She saw Coda first as a shape against the snow, then as a presence. She slowed her steps, the hem of her coat brushing frozen ground, and stopped a few paces away. She did not reach for him. She knew better than to assume trust. Instead, she set down a tin cup of water, warmed by the stove in the schoolhouse, and slid it toward him with the toe of her boot. The dog's eyes flicked to her hands, then back to the closed door. He drank only after she stepped away. It was a small exchange, almost nothing. But in towns like this, small things carry weight. By the next day, someone whispered that the schoolteacher had taken a liking to the stray police dog. By the day after that, the whisper had grown teeth. People spoke of danger, of unpredictability, of rules that existed mostly to make fear sound reasonable. Clara heard it all and said nothing. Silence, she had learned, could be a shield. Old Maeve Calder watched these moments from her window above the dry goods store. She had lived long enough to recognize patterns, long enough to know when a story was repeating itself. She remembered Elias as a young man with tired eyes and a steady walk. She remembered the way Coda had leaned into him once, just for a second, when they thought no one was looking. Some bonds, she knew, were not meant to be understood by spectators. The incident with the boot happened 3 days after the first heavy snowfall. It was Silas Boone's doing, or at least his encouragement. Silas ran the saloon and treated cruelty like a performance, something to be enjoyed if it drew enough attention. He nudged one of the younger men forward, laughing as if daring him to prove something. The boot came down. The dog stiffened. The town inhaled collectively, then exhaled when nothing dramatic followed. Coda did not bare his teeth. He did not flinch. His restraint unsettled them more than any snarl could have. It was easier to dismiss an animal that behaved like one. It was harder to reconcile the quiet dignity of a creature who seemed to understand the rules better than they did. Clara's voice cut through the moment, thin but steady. "That's enough." It was not a command, not quite, but it carried the weight of someone who had learned to stand her ground without raising it. The boot lifted. Silas scoffed. The crowd dispersed, each person telling themselves a different version of what they had just witnessed. That night, the storm worsened. Snow piled against doors and fences, turning familiar paths into uncertain guesses. Clara lit a lantern in her window and left it burning longer than usual, the glow spilling onto the street in a quiet invitation. She did not know if Coda would move closer. She did not know if it would matter. But the light felt necessary, an answer to something unspoken. Across town, old Maeve whispered a prayer she hadn't used in years, not to any particular god, but to memory itself. She believed memory had a way of finding its way home, even when buried deep beneath time and distance. Coda shifted his weight as the wind howled, snow clinging to his fur. He lifted his head, ears pricked, not toward the lantern, but toward the road leading out of town. Somewhere beyond the white blur, something old and familiar tugged at him, faint as a heartbeat under ice. He settled again, patient as ever, waiting as only those who have been taught never to give up can wait. Winter held its breath, and so did the town, though most of them didn't yet realize it. The wind changed just before dawn, easing as if the land itself were listening. Snow still fell, but slower now, heavier, each flake deliberate. Coda lifted his head long before anyone else stirred. His body went taut, not with fear, but recognition, an old signal rising through muscle and bone. Down the road, half lost in white, a figure moved against the storm with stubborn purpose. The man walked like someone who had learned to keep going even when pain argued otherwise. His coat was stiff with ice, his steps uneven, yet measured. He did not call out. He did not hurry. When he reached the edge of town, he stopped, braced a hand against a post, and breathed as though each breath were earned. Coda stood then, snow sliding from his back, and took 3 steps forward before stopping himself, training holding him in place as firmly as any hand. Someone opened a door, then another. Morning has a way of drawing witnesses. Clara saw the man first from her window, lantern still burning low. She felt it before she understood it, a tightening, the sense that something long unfinished was asking to be completed. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped outside, the cold biting through leather and wool. The man looked up when he heard her boots on the snow. His face was thinner than memory, lined by more than weather, but his eyes were unmistakable. They carried the same quiet weight, the same habit of seeing more than they revealed. Elias Crow did not smile. He only nodded, once, as if acknowledging something already agreed upon. Coda broke then, not into wild movement, not into noise, but into certainty. He closed the distance with controlled urgency, stopping inches from Elias, tail still, body trembling. Elias sank to one knee despite the pain it clearly caused him, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. His gloved hand found familiar ground along Coda's neck, fingers pressing once, twice, the signal. Coda exhaled, a sound so deep it seemed to come from somewhere beyond relief. The town gathered without realizing it had chosen to. Faces appeared, half awake, unsure whether to believe what they were seeing. Silas Boone stood among them, his earlier laughter nowhere to be found. Marshal Jonah Hale pushed through the crowd, authority stiff on his shoulders. His hand hovered near his coat, not reaching for a weapon, but for certainty. "Name yourself," Hale said, his voice carrying more force than warmth. Elias reached into his coat slowly, every movement careful. He produced a small, worn case and opened it just enough for Hale to see. No words followed. None were needed. Hale's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. He straightened, then removed his hat. The shift rippled outward. Murmurs stilled. The town understood then, not the details, but the weight of what it had dismissed. The dog at their feet was not abandoned. He was waiting, and the man they had spoken of in past tense had simply been walking a longer road home. No punishment was declared. No speeches given. Elias rose with effort and turned, his gaze finding the man who had pressed his boot into Coda's paw days earlier. The young man flushed, eyes dropping. Elias said nothing. He only held the look long enough for it to settle, for shame to do its quiet work. Sometimes justice does not need to raise its voice. Clara stood beside Elias without thinking about when she had moved. He did not reach for her hand. She did not offer it. Their closeness was enough, a shared understanding forged in small, consistent acts. Old Maeve watched from her window, tears tracing lines she no longer bothered to hide. By midday, the snow eased. Someone brought a blanket. Someone else brought food. Gestures appeared where none had existed before. Coda accepted them politely, his loyalty never wavering, but his eyes returning always to Elias. The bond between them had not weakened with distance. It had simply waited. That evening, as lamps glowed and the cold crept back in, Elias and Coda walked down Main Street together. Clara followed a few steps behind. The town watched them go, quieter now, changed in ways it would only later understand. Some stories are not about the moment of return, but about the waiting that makes it meaningful, about the quiet strength it takes to remain kind in the face of dismissal, about the loyalty that does not ask to be seen, yet deserves to be remembered. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of patience or dignity, or the silent courage found in unlikely places, then stay a while longer. Subscribe, and walk with us through more whispered tales, where hearts heal slowly, and even in winter, something faithful is always waiting to come home.